Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. This episode is sponsored by Rimmel Greenhouse Systems, makers of quality greenhouse structures. Whether you're just getting started or buying your 10th tunnel, Rimmel has a structure to fit your needs. I've purchased and grown in Rimmel houses and would recommend them to everyone. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick here with yet another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. Today's episode is with Jesse McDougall, who is a farmer at Studio Hill, a fourth-generation family farm in Vermont, and Savory Influencer Hub. He's also co-founder of Regenerative Food Network and CEO of Southshire Meats. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So give us a little of an overview. How did you get attracted to farming?
Oh, I was attracted to a girl who had a farm. Is the most direct route. I didn't grow up in farming. I grew up in the mountains of New Hampshire, and I loved being outdoors and was outdoorsy and handy. But no, I fell in love with a girl who was fourth generation on a farm, and through an early and unfortunate death in the family of her aunt, my wife and I ended up farmers. And through tragedy came opportunity, and we learned our way as we went.
Yeah. So tell us then, what age was that when you started onto the farm?
Oh, let's think. That was 10 years ago. I was 33. My wife was a little younger than that. And she had grown up visiting the farm every summer and going there school vacations and loved it and knew it like the back of her hand, but wasn't farming per se. And I was just a web geek. I was a web programmer who knew nothing about it. And her aunt died, and we found ourselves suddenly grass farmers.
And so what was that first year or so like of you kind of being on the farm?
Oh, it was panic, and it was pure worry. You're just, I didn't know what I was doing. Edie, my wife's aunt, had it all in hand. She made it look easy, and nobody else knew much about it because she had everything handled so capably for 40 years. I mean, she started managing there when she was 16. And so we had to, she died of cancer, a brain cancer that came on in 2011, and she passed away in 2012 at 56 years old. And so our first decision was to stop spraying any chemicals or poisons on the land. And because we were scared that there might be a connection there, this superhero in our lives was just taken out all of a sudden. And so the farm had been managed conventionally. It was a conventional hay and corn farm and horse boarding facility in those days. And we stopped spraying anything and everything. And right away, going into the winter of 2012, and then next season, we ran out to the fields to expect quote unquote organic, abundant growth, and found our fields couldn't produce anything. And it was devastating. And we panicked, didn't know what we'd done wrong, couldn't figure out, what we thought we had caused the collapse of the farm. And, years later, we came to realize we had only uncovered a dead ecosystem. We didn't create the dead ecosystem. We had revealed it, but no, we lost crops that year. We lost crops the next year, and we all had off the farm jobs to support our losses in farming, and just kind of muscled through as farmers do in those years. But that started our experimentation and research and reading and conversations with people about how to bring a farm back to abundance after it's been depleted. And we weren't going with chemicals, and we didn't like We were stubborn, and we just kind of came around to holistic management and the whole Savory suite of, management tools, and the idea of putting animals back on the land to help the land, which was so foreign to us because we had seen the destruction the horses had done on the land, and we had seen the damage cows had done when it was a dairy, and the idea of putting more hooves on the ground to make it stronger was weird. But we, like I said, we're stubborn, and so we tried it.
Yeah.
And the key, of course, being the animals aren't bad for the land, it's the poor management that's bad for the land. And so with those management changes and a lot of experimentation, we were able to restart the carbon and water and mineral cycles in the land, and things started spiraling back in the right direction. Thank goodness.
Yeah. So how did you get introduced to the Savory systems?
It's kind of a fluke, like his TED Talk came out, Alan Savory's TED Talk came out in 2013, and we had just had a little baby boy in late 2013, and he was colicky, and I was up late, I think 2-3 in the morning, bouncing him on my knee, playing these TED Talks on loop because they were, monotone and soothing, and they were something I could watch while he was falling asleep. And Alan Savory's TED Talk came on. It was in heavy rotation at that time, and I didn't listen. I didn't care. I was just kind of zoned out. But when he started talking about the stocky plants and washouts and green slime and bare soil he was seeing in the grasslands that were desertifying in Africa, it caught my attention right away. And I, because I had seen that same thing going on in my backyard in one of the most humid environments on the planet. It was totally different from that. And so I started paying attention and reading more about it. And like I said, I was totally skeptical, but I was totally desperate as well. And, 7 years later, I got to meet him and spend a few days with him and tell him that very same story about not giving a shit about his TED Talk. And then all of a sudden it changes my life, and he got a kick out of it. So,
So talk to us a little bit about, we've talked about the farm. What is the farm? How many acres? What's the different enterprises on the farm?
Great. Yeah, it's a gorgeous farm. It's expanding. Unlike most farms, like when I started there, it was 220 acres, and now we're 320 acres.
Oh, wow.
Because we've been able to acquire more land around us as people sell. And, not because of a trust fund or off the farm job, but because the land management we practice now is profitable, and we can get loans for it. And so it is a rolling green hilltop farm in Shaftesbury, Vermont. We have it's like the foothills of two mountain ranges. There's the Adirondacks to the west and the Green Mountains to the east, and we're staring at both of them, and it's really, really gorgeous. And so our main enterprise right now is sheep. We have a flock that gets up to about as big as 200 sheep, and we're going for more. I think we can get up to 300 sheep with 100 breeding ewes in the next year or two. And then in some years we raise poultry, and we have a farm stays enterprise going, which has been key to our livestock operation, in that it kind of cushions the dips and dives in agricultural production, and brings a lot of customers to our door. And then we do consulting and education as well, on the farm and off the farm. So I think it's those three legs that hold up the stool.
Now, Andrew Knoffel is at Clearbrook Farm. He's not too far from you, correct?
No, he's a hero of mine. He's right down the road. We can almost see his farm from my farm.
Okay. Yes. I've been there multiple times. They do a great job over there.
They're great.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So now I'm really located because when we got in the podcast, you said, I used to be a neighbor, and I was like, yeah, Vermont's a big place. But now that I've realized exactly where you are, you're very close.
Very close. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I used to, you don't remember, but I used to rent your featherman equipment, and I'd come up and you'd unload it out of the storage container
Okay.
into my truck, and off we pop.
Yes. Now I remember. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Now I remember. Yes. Okay. That makes, yes. Yeah. It's only been what now? It's been 7 years since I've been up there. So I guess it has been a little bit of time. Yeah.
Yeah, those were what's interesting is I was renting your featherman equipment because I couldn't afford my own. And that was the first experiments. Those chickens were the first experiments that we did with this regenerative ag stuff. So that must have been 2013, 14, somewhere in there.
Yep.
And we were moving those chickens through gravel pits. We were feeding them grain, but we weren't and we built these Joel Salatin style, mobile coops that put the birds right on the field, and just trying it out, moving the birds every 12 hours, trying to get some interaction with animals in the soil. And it worked so well. We couldn't believe it. And we would, like 2 days after the birds moved out of a spot, it looked terrible. 2 weeks, it had new blades of grass. And 2 months later, it was just like a lush green lawn coming down the middle of this gravel pit. And that was all the proof we needed, that we needed to double down hard. And so we were able to sell all those birds, and we came over to your place to get the equipment and process them all on the farm, and just kept kind of spiraling up from there.
That's awesome. Now, what other major changes have you made to the farm since you've taken it over?
Oh man, what hasn't changed? That's probably easier to answer. Well, we still do the hay operation. We've gone in but we've moved from square bales, which are very labor intensive, to round bales, which was a huge back and time saver for us. We started lambing when we started with sheep. We started lambing in March, which everybody told us was lambing season. It was just like common knowledge that you breed so that you lamb in March. And so we did that. And, we were having ewes give birth at 20 below zero, and our casualty rates were too high. And it was just terrible to get up at 4 a.m. and go out and do that. Plus the grain costs alone to try to keep pregnant and nursing ewes healthy and strong when the farm is producing nothing was nuts. So we transitioned that to be May and June, when the deer were having their fawn in the area, when the landscape could actually provide for the animals. And so that was a huge shift in the right direction when we started doing that. And we through a lot of breeding, but also through that shift, we're able to eliminate buying grain for the sheep entirely. And that was a huge economic boost for us.
Really? So you went to no grain at all for the sheep?
Yeah. After the chickens, after the chicken enterprise was up and going, we wanted to scale up, right? Our livestock operation. And we thought, well, we're doing chickens, let's do more chickens. And we did the math, and it literally came to, we would need to have raised 1 million chickens a year on our acres to cover it all in 1 year, the way we were doing it. Nobody wanted that. So we not only could we, didn't want that, but who would process them, and who would sell them, and who would buy them, and all that. So so we decided to get a sheep, or 2 lambs, I think it was, to precede the chickens on the fields in the rotation. And the next day, a woman knocked on our door and said, I need a home for 45 sheep. Do you guys know anybody? Because she had asked, actually, and the woman had asked down at Clearbrook Farm, and Andrew told her to come up the hill. talk to us. And so we just kind of swallowed hard and took on that flock. And but they were a hair breed of sheep, which we didn't know what that meant at that time. So
Yeah.
we thought we were getting into the wool business, but they shed, so we weren't. So we were suddenly in the meat business, and they were very grain dependent at that time because they were kept in a barn year round. And after a few generations, they didn't remember what grass was, and nor could they survive on it. So we put them out on lush, the best grass we had at the time, and they ate all they could, and they got slow and weaker, and we finally figured out that they were dependent on grain. So what we did was we started breeding them back to grass, which took years, took 5-6 years. Every year when the lambs were born, half of them roughly would be okay on grass alone, and after they weaned, and then half of them would get slow and weak, and we would pull them out and put them in their own grassy paddock, but feed them grain, and they'd come back to health, and then we would send them to the butcher at the end of the season, and then breed the others. And we just kind of bred those that were getting stronger and stronger on their natural diets. And finally, 6 years later, we had a grass-fed flock again of about 60 breeding ewes and all of their lambs. And that was our first grain-free year, which, because we were buying regenerative grain, organic regenerative grain from Stonehouse Grains down in Hudson Valley, it was which we believed to be the right thing. It was still just wasn't cheap,
Yeah.
We weren't buying the local grain mill stuff, the commodity stuff. So a huge savings for us there. And other than that, just changes on the farm have been really focusing on trying to make everything on the farm work for us. There was, 4 generations of infrastructure and equipment and dark corners that were just full of junk that, just collected over time, and the family never thought of because they'd abandoned it to the generational mess, And so I don't know where we found the energy, because we don't have it now, but my wife and I looked around and said, look at all these dark corners that aren't doing anything. Let's put them into use. And so we just started renting a construction dumpster and sitting it on the farm. And we had, I think it was 30 construction dumpsters hauled off the farm of just junk. There was nothing valuable in any of this stuff. And we just cleaned out building by building and turned one into a farm store where our guests at the Airbnb could come down to, and turned one into an Airbnb, made an office. And we just kind of set out at breathing new use into these old buildings, as opposed to, buying more or getting loans, or, our motto on the farm was never buy anything, because we could make it or find it somewhere in the mess. And that really helped us. We were able to spend a lot of time and not a lot of money to get things to where they were producing again.
Yeah. So then talk to us about the sheep. Now, do you sell how do you sell the sheep?
Well, now what we're doing is we're selling lamb as retail and wholesale. And the meat has been good. Like we stumbled into what people call the best lamb they've ever tasted. And I don't know quite what to attribute that to, whether it's the breed of sheep that we have, which is a Katahdin breed, which were developed in Maine for flavor and hardiness and personality. So it's a really easy keeper of an animal. And we've bred a whole bunch of parasite resistance into them. So I'm very happy with that. So that's been good. But margins were still slim on meat, right? Because it's food. And one day I'm over at the slaughterhouse, and I'm dropping off some animals, and I see these bags of sheepskins go out of the back and just get hauled into a render truck. And I was like, don't people do something with those? I think that people do something with those. And so
Yeah.
I did some quick Googling, and it just so happened that next weekend in Randolph, Vermont, which is just a few hours north of me, there was a grand opening of something called Vermont Natural Sheepskins by a woman named Sarah Scully. Because I knew like sheepskins were a thing, but I didn't want to send them to Bucks County or these giant industrial tanneries, because I'm trying to regenerate the ecosystem. I don't want to participate in tearing it down. So, but this thing called Vermont Natural Sheepskins was opening next weekend, and my wife and I jumped in the car and we headed up there and we visited with Sarah, and so we started sending her sheepskins, and she would tan them up with a veggie tanning process, and all natural. The worst thing to come out of that process is salt. It's a process that's organically certified in the UK, but not here because we don't have such a program. Anyway, that changed the economics of a sheep entirely for us. So where we were getting retail maybe $300 per lamb for the meat, we were now getting $300 for the meat and $250 to $300 for the skin after tanning. And that put our dollars per acre right through the roof.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so now our main products are lamb and sheepskins, and we're getting into more value added stuff like bone broth and pet food, and anything else we can make use of from the animal, primarily to respect the sacrifice of the animal and make sure that nothing is wasted, which is ridiculous. And second, to recapture all the value of our effort and work, and that's been a huge advantage, I think, that we've had, in that we don't view waste as waste. We never have, and we are always looking for ways to capture the value of things that other people throw away. I mean, our Airbnbs are gorgeous and very popular and filled with Craigslist furniture,
Yeah.
My wife has a talent for she found a $8,000 Italian 10-foot dining table, but she paid $100 for it because this guy wanted it out of his house, and she didn't know that, but she brought it home, took a picture of this Italian tag on the bottom of it.
Yeah.
But that's been our approach, is like, just, we don't have money. Spend time, not money, and repurpose everything.
So you've also been the author of the first generative agriculture legislation. Talk to us a little about that.
Yeah, that was interesting. That was an interesting experience. I won't say it was a wild success. It was fun to do, and I learned quite a bit. But I'm standing on the hill on my farm one day. I'm talking to this great friend of mine named Brian Campion, who happened to be a state rep at the time. And he had been familiar with the farm. He had been there. He had been friends with Edie and some of the people there. And so he had seen the farm when it was conventionally managed, and he'd seen it collapse, and he'd seen it start coming back to health and abundance. And so I'm talking to him one day on the hill about what we had done. And he had his state rep hat on, and he's like, what can we do? What can the state do to support this kind of ag? I mean, Vermont is struggling with so many problems in agriculture, like from polluted waterways to the collapse of family farms to struggling dairy industry. He's like, this approach could help so much of it. And I was like, well, I mean, what we could do is, and I just started rattling off ways that we could support this kind of farming. And he just stopped me. He's like, okay, write it down and send me an email. And so I wrote it all down, and it wasn't very well thought out because it was just writing to a friend. And then he sent it to his lawyer that works with him at the state legislature and cleaned it up a lot. And he's like, all right, turn it into a bill. I need you in Montpelier next week. And that was that. And like, we fine-tuned it in committee and stuff like that. But basically, the idea was that any state, region, organization, whatever, town, should be promoting stewardship of land, whether that's by a homeowner, an ag producer, or forest manager, that regenerates our natural resources, and making it easier for them to do that. So we had created this idea for a regenerative certification program in the state, where if you volunteered for it as a farmer or landowner, you could get tested for various things on your land, like biodiversity and water infiltration and mineral cycling and carbon content. And I had a battery of tests that I thought would prove regeneration. And I sent that around to a bunch of people who knew better than I did. And then you could get tax breaks from the state, beyond the ag tax breaks, because you were helping them combat the water pollution in Lake Champlain and all these other problems we were having. So that was the brunt of it. And it went through, it landed in Montpelier, and people had no idea what regenerative ag was, and that was fine. So I did a lot of talking and educating and trying to talk to them about the fact that we can farm and regenerate the ecosystem at the same time, and it's possible, and whatnot. And that it was well received. People applauded it and voiced support for it, and some reps and senators really got behind it. One is Keisha Ram, who's now running for U.S. Congress, and she sought me out and really put her energy into helping me shepherd it through as far as we could take it. So that meant a lot to me. So got good support, but ultimately it was flawed because I didn't know what I was writing, and it was kicked out of committee before getting to a vote, which is fine. But what it did do is it introduced the idea of regenerative ag to the Vermont legislature, and got a very healthy conversation started in the state about what kind of ag we want here. And on the heels of that bill, I'm not claiming credit for this, but the next year, 6 or 7 other states introduced similar bills, and 5 of them passed, which was encouraging. And and Vermont decided to start a working group to look at this problem and project, and the working group is, I don't know, I think it has a 3-year commission, so it's still going, because it took them 3 years to create the working group. But we'll see what happens in the state. So in the meantime, I'm not anti-government, but I do think it is one of the slowest ways to go about getting change to happen in the world, and so we're looking at other ways now with market-based solutions, and trying to build a system that makes it economically a no-brainer for farmers to farm in a way that regenerates their natural resources. However they choose to do it, we're totally practice agnostic, and just want the outcomes. Farmers know their own land better than I ever could, and what works and what doesn't. So we just want to help them build a system for their specific context and time and available resources that helps them thrive economically while thriving ecologically.
Very cool. Now, didn't Vermont, or isn't there some current legislation that's happening around water, pumping water?
I'm not too up on that.
Okay.
I do know that there are required agricultural practices that the state came down with. It used to be recommended agricultural practices, but now it's required agricultural practices. And I'm not big on dictating practices, as I just said, because on my farm, I'm supposed to have a riparian area of 25 yards between any production area and a body of water. And that's good. That's like containing the problem where my field's a problem, but not solving the problem. So it's like a whole bunch of attempts to contain farm runoff, which needs to happen, but they're band-aids. They're not going to solve the problem. And
let's get to the root of the problem.
Fix the problem. So that's my point. Like, if your fields are 2 feet thick of carbon-rich soil, they're not leaching anything. That is just like a sponge that will never let go of anything. And you don't need a riparian area. Your nutrients will stay put. Which is what we're going for in our farm. So I view my whole field as a riparian area. Like, there's no need for it. But they're not really. The state isn't thinking about me and my farm or those who are farming like me. They're thinking about the big bad actors and trying to reel them in. So I understand the need for it.
And they try to put everyone into a box. And to them, the box in Vermont is a dairy farm.
That's right.
So,
which is nuts to me. And I'm on an old dairy farm. I was never in dairy, but I know a lot of the stories, and I know a lot of the hardship. I don't know all the hardship, but I am a farmer, and I do know farming hardship. But we can never. I put a target on my back every time I say this in Vermont, but I don't think we should be a dairy state anymore. When the local markets could support local dairies, there was room for it. Right now, there's so much competition from the Midwest, where they have more efficient landscape. Where 10,000 acres needs 2 guys and a GPS controlled tractor to manage. If you have 10,000 acres in Vermont, you have 20,000, half acre fields. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I know that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You can't get to all of them in one day. So, like, the idea, and we don't have the sunlight they have. So the idea that we could ever produce enough commodity milk to support a statewide dairy industry is flawed. And I think that our wet rolling hills are much better suited to other means of agricultural production, like small ruminants or apple orchards or vineyards, or coming on strong. But squeezing cornfields into every little bit of river bottom land that we have will never be efficient enough to compete with the commodity coming out of the Midwest. And so we need to rethink agriculture here to fit the landscape instead of fit the economic situation.
I think Vermont is built for, and Vermont did this very well, was the small family farm where they have 20 cows and maybe they have, some sheep and a few pigs. And, if everyone was selling direct to consumer on those scales, then I feel that would work. Because those small fields can, be hayed and feed those small amount of cows. But you're right. If you try to do the 3,000 cows dairies, it's not going to work economically compared to the Midwest.
That's right. And that's what the distribution system and economic situation is kind of forcing farms to do. It's like, a small farm with 30 cows, can deliver X number of gallons per week. And just like in the, in the meat industry, they're getting shut out of processing because it's like, bring me, 10,000 hundredweight, whatever, So you have to consolidate just to even play ball. So I agree with the fact that it's possible. These small family farms can thrive, but the problem is, and this is a problem I get asked a lot, is they say to me, Jesse, all right, Studio Hill is profitable economically, it is profitable ecologically. Why is not everybody doing this? And the answer is because you can only scale to a certain point in this region, right? My land can support, let's say, 300 sheep, right? But let's say I grow to that level. Where do I have it processed? Because the slaughterhouses are booked out for 3 years. And where do I sell it? There are 4 professors in this town that can afford local food. and one of them likes lamb, so do I
Yeah.
just depend on that guy to support my whole farm? I need access to better markets, right? So that's kind of been our push in the last 2 years, is to build in the infrastructure farms need to get the processing support that they need, and then to aggregate to serve bigger markets, right? So we started a company called Southshire Meats, which is one of a few companies we're starting, but we started with meat because there's a market demand for it, which is great, and there's and it's kind of like the point in the spear, economically. Like once we get a thriving meat production farm network going, that creates a need for grain to feed the omnivores in the system, right? So then we can bring in grain farmers.
Yeah.
And putting animals on the landscape on these wet rolling hills and managed properly, which of course is key, is the quickest way to start regenerating our natural resources. But that aggregation model is what changes the dynamic of farms in the area from competing with one another for those small local dollars to collaborating to fill the markets in Boston and New York, or at giant brands like Epic Provisions or Rep Provisions, or Patagonia, who are all looking for verified regenerative goods and food.
Yeah.
And there's demand right now that could pull this whole farming system forward to a sustainable, thriving level, if only we had the infrastructure in place, which we're trying to build out in our region now.
Yeah. 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 And it's really telling, because the processing aspect, the government has somewhat addressed it. I mean, then they put some money towards processing plants, but it's going to be for medium-sized processing plants, which to them is like $10 million operation plus. And it's not going to, I think, solve your processing problem. It's going to solve, these much bigger processing problems.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing the differences in scale we're talking about, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's one of the things I've learned. Like we opened a slaughterhouse right here in Wilmington, Vermont, called Higley Hill Processing. And we have a USDA inspector there every time that we're running, which is great. And we're running every day. Just like other slaughterhouses, the demand was there and it just booked out for a year in advance, which we're struggling with, trying to open up more capacity. But these inspectors from the USDA plants travel. And so they'll be with us one day when we're doing processing 20 sheep, and they'll be telling us about how they just came from Iowa, where they're doing 800 beef an hour.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
And more.
Yeah.
And then there's these middle plants like that do, somewhere between those two levels. So we're microscopic, but our plan is to put these microscopic plants and dot them to build 10 out throughout the region, right, where the farmers are. So they don't have to travel 4 hours to get processing done. When we graduated from the Featherman equipment and got bigger than we wanted to process, we had to drive 4 hours 4 times to get our chickens processed, which just totally killed the
absolutely. Yeah.
Killed the profit margin,
Yeah.
And so we could do it locally, illegally, or we could do it, far away legally, profitably or legally. That was the choice that was put to us. And so we're trying to build distributed regional infrastructure that in a hub and spoke model that aggregates food to a brand that gets it out of the region, but also just have this, half capacity of this infrastructure available to farms who want to sell it under their own steam, which we want to help and support too.
Yeah, that I like that quote right there. It's either profitably or legally, and that really shouldn't be what farmers struggle with. It should be, you know, working with the people to, I mean, because what are those regulations are there for? They're to keep people safe. But unfortunately, they are just crippling. They are way too, yeah. I could get on a high horse about this for a while, but
oh, sure. I agree. They're there for a reason. I respect and understand their intention. I'm not an anti-regulation guy, but they are, the deeper I get into this, they're totally made for the big players.
Yes.
And so, for example,
they're made for Walmart.
Yeah, they're made by Walmart for Walmart, by Walmart. If you know, to build a small meat plant, you need, you need an employee bathroom and you need an inspector bathroom. All right. Seems like a small thing, but it's a pretty big expense when you're trying to build an inexpensive plant on your own farm or something.
Let's clarify. It's a separate bathroom for the inspector, right?
It has to be a separate bathroom for the inspector, because in big plants, when the inspector would go into the restroom, they would get hassled by the employees. So the regulation was, in all meat plants, you need a separate room where the inspector can be safe. Notwithstanding the fact that these are now, the bathroom we want to build is one room, one toilet, you lock the door, it's just like, they're not thinking about us when they're making those rules. But having said that, the USDA and all the interactions we've had with them, they're pulling for us. They really want to see small farming in our region succeed, and they've been willing to work with us at every level to make sure it's right. It's when you start getting, up to the regional centers at like Philadelphia, or because our regional centers in Philadelphia, nowhere near us. That's when you start running into trouble, and complications and miscommunications and all that kind of stuff. But we're committed to working through it. There's got to be a way forward.
Yeah. Hey, thriving farmers, do you know that you are already standing on the key to bigger yields and better profits? To help maximize your yield and profit potential, look beyond the standard fertility options. Choose Ultra by AgriGrow. Ultra is an OMRI-listed soil prebiotic technology designed to develop the native microorganisms in your soil. AgriGrow's prebiotic technologies are engineered with the users in mind. Ultra is easy to use and has great tank mixing abilities that won't clog or mess up sprayers or injectors. It also does not require refrigeration like many other probiotic formulas available on the market. In December of 2020, I was introduced to AgriGrow. At first, I was a skeptic, but I was able to check out their production facility and meet the owners and staff. This company is great. Over the last year and a half, I've run several different trials using their products, and I'm really impressed with the results that I see. I've seen my soil texture improve during cultivation. I've seen decade-old heirloom corn germinate for the first time. My $6 cost of Ultra boosted my strawberry fields dramatically. AgriGrow is offering a 10% discount to all Thriving Farmer listeners. Simply use the coupon code THRIVE when you check out at smallfarm.solutions. Again, that is THRIVE for a 10% off discount on your first order. So you do a lot of, to switch topics a bit, you do a lot of education. Talk to us about how that works.
Well, we host a lot of groups on the farm, and I do a lot of consulting around the country and region. And I teach a course at the local college here. Basically, my message in all of this teaching is that there's a reason to hope. There's a way forward for the species that isn't the end of the world, So I watch my sheep, right, graze through my fields, and if they're acting naturally in a natural environment and eating their natural diets, then the environment responds by getting stronger and more abundant and more nutritious. So everywhere the sheep go, they make that environment more able to feed and sustain them just through their natural behaviors. And that's just a product of evolution. If sheep if the natural behavior of sheep was to destroy their food source, they wouldn't have survived as a species. And humans right now are very good at destroying our food source. We till the soil to nothing, and we spray it with poisons, and every year it gets harder for us to grow food for ourselves. And the UN 5 years ago said we have 60 years of food left if we keep losing topsoil at this rate. And I don't know about you, but that's terrifying. And I have kids, and they'll be around for that.
Yeah.
And it's so terrifying, I think, in fact, that people are fixating on it. Like there's a truck barreling down on them. When there's a truck barreling down on you, you're staring at that truck and not looking anywhere else. So my message to everybody is stop looking at that for a second. And I know it's hard because CNN and NPR and all these news organizations keep bringing it up, but stop looking at that for a second and imagine another way forward. We farmers around the world are proving, and have been proving since the beginning of time in various places at various times, that humans can live and improve their own environments the way my sheep do. Humans going back through time have gotten it right and have gotten it wrong, depending on 1,000 different factors. We have tilled the Midwest into a desert. We tilled the Fertile Crescent into a desert. But we've also gotten it right in places and that have sustained humans for millennia. And so right now we're getting it wrong on a global scale. But production farmers around the globe are showing that these old ways, these new ways, these old/new ways of farming can regenerate natural resources, can produce more food, more abundantly, more nutritiously, and that we should focus on creating that future as opposed to just resigning ourselves to burning up. And if we focus on and believe and work toward changing the system that is a downward spiral, and put our hope in creating the positive feedback loops that we need, we can do it. And so my farm is one humble example of that. And I love bringing people in and showing them the before and after pictures of the washouts and the gravel and the sand pits, and saying, but look around you now. The grass is up to your hip, and we've grazed it twice this year, and there are clouds of butterflies flying over your head, and there are thousands of bird species flying through the trees, and there are bunnies and foxes and voles and moles in the hedgerow, and more turkeys than you've ever seen, while we're producing more food than ever. And so when we talk to people, we talk about how management is the problem, and that the industrial management of biological systems is the problem, and that management is very easy to change. Very easy. It's not even usually a problem of infrastructure. It's not a problem of capital. It's not a problem of employment. It's just a function of getting up one day and doing it differently. And the UN also came out with a report that said, if we spend $300 billion and 30 years doing it this way, by which I mean holistically and regeneratively, I don't mean any particular practice, then we could solve climate change and produce enough enough food for the world in 30 years. And that is not what the news organizations are pumping, because it doesn't drive eyeballs. It's like, oh, good, we're going to fix it. And then you move on and drink your coffee. But that, the iceberg collapsing really keeps your attention.
I think what you're saying too is there's a way forward. The UN has established it. We've got the data to prove it, obviously through the Savory Institute and all that. But I think the news media is not putting it out there because it doesn't make a good story. It doesn't, show, as you said, the polar bear falling off the melting ice cap, and it doesn't also feed their sponsors' pockets. I mean, it doesn't.
People.
Yeah.
I think it's it's a exercise in abundance versus scarcity, right? So if you have abundance, you have everything you need as a human, you relax, you sit down, you chill, you enjoy life. Very if you have scarcity in your life or believe you have scarcity in your life, you panic, you collect, you buy, you
Yeah.
hoard, right? That's the human nature. So you think about all this advertising that's based on scarcity. It's like limited time only, or while supplies last, or what, they'll make as many as they can sell of whatever you need, but they convince you that it's running out, so you panic and you buy it. And so there's the idea that the world is abundant, and it is. Right now it's abundant and we can feed everybody. We don't have a food shortage problem, we have a distribution problem. Doesn't get far because it doesn't move our economy forward, right? It doesn't make people rich. The idea of people sitting down and relaxing for once.
Well, also people sitting down, relaxing, and people going into their backyard and harvesting their own food and being self-sufficient doesn't make companies rich either.
Yeah.
So they're going to, again, push away from that as far as possible.
Right. Because everybody has bills to pay. And I get it. Like NBC's bills are bigger than my bills, but they still got to pay their bills, and
Yeah.
and it's just a machine that's running that we take to be a force of nature. We take money to be a force of nature in the world, but it's something we invented. It's not something we can't change, like gravity, or oxygen. And it's going to take, and that's why I've been encouraged to see all these new cryptocurrencies and new ways of thinking about money and new ways of valuing ecological assets versus economic assets. People are starting to kind of pick at the edges of the economy and say, what the hell do we really value here? What is valuable? Are we really just stacking paper, or are we stacking the means by which by which we support and feed each other? So I really have, despite everything that's going on in the world, tremendous hope for the future. I really think I think we're going to pull it out, if for no other reason than we're very talented survivors. If our species is good at anything, it's surviving. We don't have claws, we don't have fangs, we're not the strongest thing in the woods. We're just these blood bags running around with no defense, and yet we survive because we're clever. And I think when push comes to shove, and I think push is coming to shove now, the human race is going to figure it out and learn how to, on a global scale, make the earth healthier and stronger for everybody and everything on it.
Absolutely. Talk to us a little bit about, I know you've got a major funding campaign with Steward right now. Talk to us a little bit about what that entails.
Well, that's fun. Steward is a great organization. I cannot say enough good about them, for a reason you'll understand in a second. But they came out of, is my understanding, the Fundrise crowdfunding platform, started by a guy named Dan Miller, who Fundrise was primarily for real estate projects, like fixing up community centers and stuff like that, and allowing a community to invest in itself, where sometimes they couldn't get traditional funding to reinvest in their community and the buildings there. And he can, you should interview him and he'll correct me where I'm wrong. But then he said, let's do this for regenerative agriculture. There's so much that needs fixing up, quote unquote, in the landscape. Let's start a platform like Fundrise for ecosystems. And so he started Steward, with the same kind of model where they create participated loan campaigns that look like GoFundMe or Kickstarter, but they're not donations. They're not asking for gifts. They're soliciting loans, secured loans from people, and they give that money to regenerative farms for projects. And then, therefore, then the community that supports that regenerative farmer project earns a return on their loan, while the farmer project gets access to capital that they wouldn't otherwise, because they're a small farm and it's so hard to get financing. So my family farm, my wife's family farm, the one we're on, Studio Hill, is kind of horseshoe shaped, right?
Okay.
And in the middle of the horseshoe is a hilltop on which sits a gorgeous large home that was built there in 2002. And it's nice, it's gorgeous, but it was kind of a bummer when that got built, right, for the family, because it's like, oh man, now we got this thing looking down on us. And
yeah,
we're grateful it wasn't 50 homes up there, and we're grateful that the family that was there was wonderful, but still kind of like a bummer on the landscape. And so one day that neighbor walks down the hill and he says, hey, we're moving to Florida. Do you want to make an offer on my house? I know you said years ago that you were interested in maybe making an offer. And I said, yeah, great. Thank you. He said, great. I'll give you a month. I'll put it on the market in a month, which was tremendous. But I didn't have the money.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, damn it. I figured it would be 40 years from now, or when his kids were grown and gone, because his kids are still there and in school. Anyway, so like I was panicking. I'm like, I have a month to figure this out. And then I sit down at my desk, my head's still spinning, and I get an email from our neighbor to the south who says, I'm getting offers on my land sight unseen from people in Connecticut who were all fleeing COVID.
Yeah.
And he's like, I told you I'd never sell, but it's time. Do you want to make an offer on my land? And this was the same Thursday afternoon. I'll never forget it. And so,
wow.
Two of my neighbors, uncoordinated, asked me if I would buy them out. And I had, I don't know, maybe $18 in a savings account.
It was one of those days. Yes.
It was just scraping it by. But what we had was a profitable business on the farm in livestock and Airbnb, and it was supporting the land and the family. And so I wrote up a quick business plan to expand both enterprises onto this new land and into the new houses that were on this land. And I shopped it around to every bank in the region that I had a relationship with. And I was like, this is the business expansion plan for the farm. And they were very nice. And some of them even came out and toured the property. And then with 4 days left to my deadline, because I spent 26-ish days working on this with the banks, they're like, nope, we're not going to fund it. It's small ag and we don't have money for that. It's too risky. And, broke my heart, and I didn't know where to turn. And then a cousin of ours sent me a link to Steward and said, maybe you should talk to these guys. And so I got on the phone, sent them the business plan. They said, this would be the biggest project we've ever done. It's awesome. Let's try. And then we worked it out. They did the due diligence on me, which was thorough, like really deep and thorough, but flexible, more flexible than banks could be, which I appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And they had more leeway because they're a small private lending company. And we worked it out, and they sent me the money I needed to make offers on those two properties. And then we closed on the two properties, and they became part of the family farm. And now we're in this participated loan campaign portion of it to raise up the rest of the funds that we needed to pay off the bridge loan they furnished, and then get the working capital we need to expand the flock, remodel one little Airbnb, and get those up and running. And so that's been a few months of this participated campaign running, where we have our page at Steward, and my job is to promote it out as best I can to my networks.
Yeah.
And they promote it out to their networks of funders, and people from all over the world have been donating to our campaign with the nicest notes and it just, there's one person who gives $100 a week out of a savings account every week without fail. Mm-hmm. And it is just so meaningful to see all this support rain in, just helping us grow and regenerate more land, and through our farm stays business, show more people, the clouds of butterflies and the flock of sheep and the tall grass and the abundance that can be created. And I call it hope tourism. People come in and they feel restored and hopeful, and they go home and they tell their friends, you got to go see this. And so we're just trying to build this stream of people to come through the farm and see what we're doing, and go see other farms that are doing it. And there are more impressive examples out there, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But we're proud of what we're doing. Anyway, Stewart said yes when everybody else said no, and really worked with us to make it happen. And so we just crossed $1.2 million raise today. And so we have $100 and some odd $1,000 left to raise. Mm-hmm. And, it's coming in chunks of $100, $500, $1,000 now. And it means the world. And so lenders are getting, 6% interest on their loan for 7 years, and then they're paid off in full after 7 years. So if it's just a great model that allows people with savings accounts that aren't earning much to put their money into regenerative projects that really speed the regeneration of natural resources and ecosystems in the world, in a way that without Stewart, how else would you do that? There's no other way, no other great way to do that. So it's been a huge win for us. My wife and I still get teary when we think about all that's happened in the last few years and how Stewart came through for us. And my uncle, my wife's uncle, who lives with us, who is an old-timey farmer, and very used to people not helping farms.
Yeah.
He's kind of curmudgeonly and bitter. And I told him what we'd done, and he just looked at me like staring with a blank face for a good 15 seconds. And he shook his head and he walked away. And I was like, what was that about? Is he angry about this, or what's going on? And he came back to me the next day and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, Jesse, I don't know what kind of fancy footwork you pulled to buy that place, but we could have had a real disaster up there.
Yeah.
He was like literally speechless that anybody would come and lend us enough to buy that place and expand a farm in this time. But and that just goes to show how wounded farmers are and distrustful, and nobody can blame them.
Yeah.
But I hope we're able to turn that around in the next coming years, and because we need them. We need farmers we need the managers of the ecosystem and those who know how to regenerate it working as hard as they can, as fast as they can, with all the support they need.
Absolutely. Well, Jesse, it's been an honor to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate your time and your just honesty and your passion for this. This has been great. So I really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
This episode is sponsored by Rimmel Greenhouse Systems, makers of quality greenhouse structures. Whether you're just getting started or buying your 10th tunnel, Rimmel has a structure to fit your needs. I've purchased and grown in Rimmel houses and would recommend them to everyone. So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.